Well, I'm going to start out with something a little unusual, and I may not have you suffer through the entire thing. But as Jessica says, I was born and raised about 4 blocks from here. My father's house is sitting in there. This was my playground when I was a kid. This is the 3rd or 4th iteration on this dirt that I have seen in my life. And every time you gain something, you lose something. I mean, we used to be able to come out here and camp and cook hot dogs at night and this kind of stuff. Well, you can't do that now. And so what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to curse you with this is a little video called Air Prescott. But here's what we look at. And this is up on top of the hill, up by the new school. October 17th, not quite a month ago. Beautiful day. And for those of us who live in Prescott, I'm as guilty as most, we often forget this is where we live. It's beautiful. And when people who have never been here before come down the road or into town and they say, "You live here?" And I go, "Yeah, why?" He says, "Well, this is gorgeous." And so it kind of puts it in perspective. I had a friend who he's lived in Thailand, he's lived in Chile, and all over the world, and he came down the road the other day. I don't know how many of you came down from Minnesota, and as he was coming down the road from the airport, he asked us, he says, "This is where you live?" And we said, "Well, yeah." He says, "Wow." He said, "This is gorgeous." So my daughter reminded me of that when she was 8 years old also. The maple trees. There's the mighty Mississippi from about 400 feet up. Now we're on the other side of the river. We're launching from Minnesota, and we're going to look up the St. Croix on a beautiful day, National Scenic Riverway. The pollution has lessened greatly, to say the least. I used to do water tests for the states in the late 60s, and the results are much better, much better.
What do you attribute that to?
We're getting smarter. You can't blame people for pollution. We didn't know we were doing it. And so our production methods and what we do with our garbage, we've improved. I just think it was a learning curve issue. You know, you used to be a farmer, you had a ditch, you threw everything in a ditch, right, Harley? And so here we are. This is a little 180 of Prescott. And when I was a kid, this was all 70 and 80 foot cottonwood trees all the way along there. There was a kid beach in the corner and the adult beach. So now I'm launching from Prescott, and we're on the downtown and riverfront, and up we go. The 2 bridges, we're going to start with bridges because bridges are a unique thing in most areas. The Hastings Bridge is beautiful. I got to drive across the Stillwater Bridge a week or so ago. Hadn't been across the new bridge. What a marvelous peak of architecture. And those type of things give me faith in mankind because we can do things like that. And I was a retired towboat pilot. I had a license for 10 years, and here comes a big boy coming upriver. I didn't organize this. It was sheer random dumb luck. It's an Ingram boat based in Paducah, Kentucky. He's pushing 7 loads of road salt, and I don't know what's in the cover top. Most of the road salt is brought up end of the year, so they don't have to store it all year. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, Friday morning, go to get my coffee at about 5:30, and I'm coming down the hill, and here's a towboat going upriver in November. And if you're a deckhand, you don't like that. Now look at this. That's the Mississippi and the St. Croix water mixing. That is stunning. And what I tell people is that's the Minnesota farms going downriver. And it is. I was a pilot on the Minnesota River. There were days when you could nearly walk across the Minnesota River. The mud was so thick. But yet the farmers say, "Oh, don't make me put in a grass set aside." And says, "Great, you're not going to have any farm. You don't take care of your dirt, your farm's going to fail." And so there's the Minnesota dirt. Now Prescott also had the highest percentage of river pilots of any city in the nation. In the late 70s and 80s, there were over 40 licensed pilots living in the city of Prescott. I think we're down to about a half a dozen.
Why is that?
Why is it? Well, a couple different things. But notice on that one, I've got everybody. I've got the boats, I got trains, and I've got the cars, and I didn't plan any of it. So fortune strikes. We'll talk about that. The baseball field. I am the groundskeeper with a little help from Charles once in a while and a few other people. The flowers, my wife and I do that. Here's where we are. And as I have been from one end of the Mississippi to the other, figuratively and literally, it is one of the most beautiful interpretive centers in the entire river system. And I know there were people in town who weren't in favor of this, but boy, it is a beautiful place. It does us a lot of good. And the people who stop enjoy it. And so here we are looking at, in Freedom Park, you'll see some pictures of the first iteration from about 1916. And now we're going to go to another spot in town. One more look down the river. Beautiful blue water. This down here is what used to be Hermanson's Island, and I'll mention that later. The Hermanson family, I don't think there's any living in town, but there were many, many of them. Two I graduated from high school with. One graduated with my wife. Their father was a good friend of my father's. So here we are up on top of the hill again, up in the area of our new high school. This is the roof of our new high school. And this is a 360. This is the highest spot in Prescott. And so you're going to do a 360 and look around and say, well, what are we seeing up here?
Where's the new high school located?
It sits on the east side of town on Highway 10. We just finished it a year ago. I gave up 2 years of my life to finish that building. Literally worked 7 days a week for 2 years to do it. And I couldn't be more pleased. But again, we often forget, and there's what it looks like from 400 feet up. And here we come down in a hurry. So we're dropping 400 feet here in about 20-some seconds. I also taught video production at the high school for the last, I don't know how many years, 15, 14, something like that. And so that is called Air Prescott. And it's an unusual little thing, but it gives you a good look at our town. And if you want to look at it, it actually has music to it. You don't have to listen to me.
Google Air Prescott?
You just go on YouTube and look for Air Prescott. Yep. All right, well now I looked at how to do this, and I'm going to do this in a kind of an unusual format. And Harley, can I come? Let's see if I can. Are you two okay yet?
Yeah.
Because I know they weren't. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit. Charles and Mary are members of the Historical Society with me, and they're cursed by me coming and yakking once in a while. And so this is kind of a raw format because I kind of want to show you what we do. Rather than show you a polished presentation, I want to show you some of the things that we have to go through when we look at this type of thing. So we start in here, and I mentioned bridges, okay? This is 1904, okay? This is 1904. This is the second bridge being built in Prescott. It's replacing the 1886 bridge. It's a tin type. And they use cyanide to develop them. They kind of get a bluer, this brownish tinge to them. So this is the train bridge going up, the second train bridge. We have the third train bridge in place now.
Was it also a lift bridge?
No, it was a turntable. It spun. There's another turntable bridge in Stillwater, between Stillwater and Hudson. There is one, Pig's Eye Bridge, which you can't see really in St. Paul unless you dive down into the swamps. Got run into by the Cooperative Venture a week ago and damaged it so badly that the bridge doesn't work anymore. Well, when you miss, it hurts. Each barge carries 1,500 tons, and he had 12 of those babies on him. So you figure he had, what, 14, 15, 18 thousands of tons, and he ran into the bridge and the towboat won. So they're down to one span. That means that they can only use half of it. Unfortunately, that's a common thing. Oh, she's looking at it. Come on, get down there.
This is shot from the Prescott side, Al?
Yes, this is shot from the Prescott side, Charles. Yep. And let me get down there. And I, of course, haven't used this computer, so I'm looking at the things that I want to see.
Blown up, it looks like there's a bunch of workers standing on the thing.
Well, yes, they're actually standing right here. This is the work crew is actually building it. This is the Coffer Dams they built in the middle and those types of things. Oh, where in the world?
What is a coffer dam?
A Coffer Dam. I built bridges as part of my river job, and you take a thing like a sheet piling, and a sheet piling would be, let's say it's a 60-foot great big sheet of steel, and they're about this wide, but they're shaped almost like a U. And this side has a channel, this side has a slot, so that I can hook these big sheet piles together. So we take a pile driver out there and you pound those sheet piles down into the bottom of the river at least 20 to 30 feet so that you can beat the water pressure trying to crush it. Then inside of those sheet piles, you put whalers. Whalers are a steel frame that fits inside. They're about like this and about like this, and solid steel, 1.5 inches to 1.25 inches thick, and then you put that inside and you weld it in place. When you got your sheet piles in, you got your whalers in there, then you pump your water out. Now you can get down in there 40 feet below the surface of the Mississippi, and you can dig your foundations and pilings and this type of thing in. And so you think about it, when you're down there 40 feet, if one of those sheet pilings gives out, you're going to die. Just one of those things. Okay. Well, I'm looking for the easy advance, but I don't. Oh, there we go. All right. Here's what the bridge looked like when it was done. If you'll notice up here, this is the ferry. There was a ferry in Prescott for years and years and years. And this is the Coffer Dam, or the shear fence that I mentioned. They put the shear fence in there to keep people like me, the towboat pilots, from running into your bridge. It gives them a little bit of protection. I can remember when the Prescott car bridge was knocked 6 inches out of square, and they couldn't open it because one of the pilots that we call Captain Crash happened to miss. Luckily it was empty barges, or he may have done a lot more damage than that. It took him about 3 days with great big hydraulic things to wrench our bridge back so that it worked properly. He's dead now. All right, here we are. This is a Mr. Fiedler from town bringing his horse and buggy across. We're taking the picture from Minnesota. If you look up on top here, you're going to see some unusual things. This up here is the top of our old high school building, which was built in 1887. Most of these old buildings are gone. A few of them are still hanging around in there, though. Here's that ferry again, the ferry at Prescott. There's a book called The Perilous St. Croix River Valley, and it's only about this thick, but it's very interesting. And the ferry operators had problems. It's kind of a boring job. You know, you're sitting there for an hour, nobody shows up. So they happened to bring a jug with them upon occasion. And there were several ferry operators who got so drunk that they fell off and drowned. So I guess drunkenness is an occupational hazard, especially when you're wearing 40 pounds of woolen clothes and you happen to fall in. So here, something's happening. This is the pounding of the first pilings for the Prescott Bridge, started in 1921. And so all steam powered. They started from Minnesota and worked over. This over in the corner here, this is where we call blockers, or this is where the big park is, and look what it used to look like. And actually right here, Point Douglas was still there. The city of Point Douglas actually used to be larger than the city of Prescott. The UCC Church, I believe, Charles, started in Point Douglas and moved back to Prescott. Point Douglas is pretty much gone. There's a couple buildings. I've meandered up on the hillside through the trees and the brush, and there's some old limestone foundations and that up there, but Point Douglas is physically pretty much gone. They have an active historical society who is saving some of it.
It's worth noting, Dallas, why the church moved to Prescott. It's because the pastor recognized that Prescott needed a church a whole lot more than Point Douglas.
Well, some of the things in history that I know that I probably won't talk about today lend credence to that. Now, in here, this is how they pounded the pilings in. So look at here, they're clamming down in there. And like I said, this is old technology, steam driven. It's not like we have now. This big building here, you're going to see this ad infinitum. That is the 4-story, actually 3.5, 4 if you count the basement, the International Order of Oddfellows Hall. And we happen to have an Oddfellow in the room, and that is Charles. The Oddfellow were some people who...
Only one of the Oddfellows.
Good point. But anyway, the Oddfellows were people who didn't really join another group or a caste or whatever. They were just Oddfellows who believed in doing good things. Charles, were they a little bit of a temperance league also?
I think so.
Because when this building was torn down, and there was a rider on the property, which I'm trying to find out is still in effect, that property could not be used to build any establishment that sold alcohol. And so when it was the Steamboat Inn, it was the parking lot. The Steamboat didn't sit on that property. Well, the weird things in history. Now I'm sure you can find some shyster lawyer who would tear it all apart and say, well, that's not good, and this kind of stuff. But so they're digging down, they're trying to level it out in the bottom. All right, here's that IOF building again. And they're almost in Prescott here now. But notice, everything's done with horse and buggies. Everything's done with horse and buggies. And here we are, almost done. They're pouring the concrete deck in the bridge with the Rex mixer from Minneapolis, Minnesota. They were a company that made mixers in Minnesota for about 60 years. They really don't exist anymore. And there's our bridge, almost over. You'd have to jump a long ways to get across here, but here's our old building again. The wheel's up here. The control building is not up here yet. Getting closer. And here we are, June 22nd, 1923. Woohoo! Prescott's got a bridge. Now, the unusual part about the bridge was that Prescott's businesses were dying because the businesses in Prescott were basically founded upon the boat traffic, the river traffic, the train traffic, and the agricultural business from out here. Well, when it got to be around 1900, the steamboat traffic started to slow down. Not as many people came to town and this type of thing. There was a time in Prescott when I believe there were 21 hotels. Because everybody hopped off here. And you might have to wait for a train to go somewhere for a couple, 3 days, so you stayed here. And so they were worried the town was going to die. And so what they did was some of the local businessmen got together and they said, let's build a bridge. So they talked to the state of Minnesota, they talked to the state of Wisconsin, they said, can we build a bridge? And they said, sure. And so, this is what we ended up with. It was a private corporation, there were tolls on it. In the wintertime, the guy who ran the bridge would get angry. Well, and the ferry operators used to too, because why? What difference would it make to their business in the winter? No, they went down to the beach on Lake Street and drove across the ice and didn't pay the toll. And that's an honest fact, because a nickel was a nickel and so up until the 1940s, the ice road was used every winter. And they would drive down on our beach, and if you went and looked, you'd see where the road is, and then they would come out in Minnesota over there. There was always somebody every year who had to test the ice road. There were a few occasions where it wasn't really successful. They've had to pull horses and buggies out of them. There was a horrible thing happened. The French family, Freddie was one of them. Freddie, he'd be 100 and some years old now. But anyway, he was one of them who lived on Lake Street, and he tested the ice road. And as he got older, he had kids. Pete is my age and graduated with him. His 2 younger sons went out on the river, and the ice floe broke off, and they drowned. And so the ice is not always a safe thing. All right, here's a celebration on this. This picture was taken the same day. This is taken from the upper story of the IOOF building. This is looking down Highway 10. If you come off the bridge right now and took a left, this is where you would be going. This house sits exactly where the Dairy Queen is. Sits exactly where the Dairy Queen is. Now remember, that road ended at Lake Street. It did not go up around the corner. It ended at Lake Street and it went down to Lake Street. There was no road up around there. Highway 10 came in on the top of town by the stoplight, drove into town, and came down the Orange Street Hill. And so things have changed. To be honest, the baseball park in town used to be about 2 blocks from here, and the county fairgrounds, and they loved that, except that they needed some sand, and it happened to sit on a big pile of sand. So in 1921, 1922, when they were just getting the bridge finished, they came, closed the baseball park down, and dug all the sand out, and built Highway 10 where it is today, coming around the hill like that. And the baseball field got moved over into the middle of town. Here's downtown on the same day. On the same day. Now, a lot of these buildings are gone. See, these two are gone. When I was a youngster, there was a fire station there. We had our fire department was downtown. This building is still here. This building is still here. This is our history center. This is our welcome and heritage center. These are all gone. These are all gone. You see the clock tower sit where this one is. All these buildings are gone. The only building that's left on this side is this one right here, which is next to the courtyard. And actually, it was the mortuary for a long time. My grandma lived upstairs when it was a mortuary, and there was a young guy that I knew, a year older than me, and he drowned in the pool. And I went to visit Grandma, and I said, geez, you know, Paul's downstairs, he drowned, Grandma. And he says, well, have you ever seen anyone who's died? And I said, nope. So my grandmother took me downstairs to look at Paul Gibbler, who drowned in the pool, 60 years ago almost now. But it has been a lot of different things since then, from a tattoo parlor to an antique store to a bank. Here you go. We got a politician giving a speech. The hot air still blew around then, just maybe not as far. And here we are. Everything's in place. We got the big boat coming through there. Oh, I got to go back once here. I want to show you something that people look at this. Look right here. It looks like you're going off the edge of the world. What's happening? Remember, this is 1923 now. What's happening? A train's coming by, and they're coal-fired trains, and they smoke like the dickens, and they have a smoke stream. So not too long ago, a train went by there and basically smoked out the south end of town. The road that you came up here did not exist at this time. It only went up about 1.5 blocks that you went, and then it ended. And the road around there wasn't put in for a long time.
And Walnut Street went right down.
It didn't go all the way down. No.
Go down to
No, Walnut Street never went all the way. Yeah, that always ended. We'll see that picture of that a little later. Now, this house is gone. This was the house of Florence Fiedler. As a young rugrat in town, she was one of my favorite ladies. She was a teacher. She was just a wonderful woman. They just tore her home down about 2 years ago on that fiasco. I'm sorry, I'm going to allow my feelings to enter into this. The fiasco on the corner where the Steamboat used to be. In my opinion, that should be a park. It shouldn't be a bar. It shouldn't be a condominium. It should be returned to the people. We lost that site in 1896. We got it back in 1956. I think we need to keep it now that it's open, but we'll see. But these ladies are sitting up there doing what people love to do. They're sidewalk superintendents watching the bridge construction. So that's what they're doing, sitting out there watching the bridge being built. And here it is. This is an unusual one. You're coming from Minnesota, you're up on the wheels. And this is what the bridge looked like coming into town. Oh, come on.
That's the Oddfellows Hall on the left. Right?
Yeah, yeah, and so here's the IOF hall. There's a little home right here. It is gone now. That was the McQuarrie family. Mrs. McQuarrie still lives in town. Her daughter Lisa is around. And they had a little farm down there. They had a barn and all this kind of stuff, and it was torn down when they built the new bridge. Come on, give me that back.
So is that Cherry Street going up?
Yes, yes it is, absolutely. And then we're going to come here a little bit. Come on, I want to get you a little bit bigger so we can go and look a little bit. Horse and buggy, of course. But now it's kind of fuzzy, but right here's a gas station. That was the first gas station in town, right on this corner. It was a Phillips Petroleum, it was a Harker Oil, and they had an outdoor lift to change your oil. They just do it outside, and this type of thing. Next to it was the big old, actually it was a livery stable. It was used for storing hay, it was used for storing animals. When I was a kid, it was basically used by Mr. Daly to store every odds and end and weird piece of stuff you can imagine in the world, and for a young kid it was paradise. There was more than once when we snuck in the back window and lifted it up and went in and walked around inside Mr. Daly's big old building because it was really cool. Of course, we weren't supposed to be in there, so we didn't tell anybody. Okay, something happened. We got guys with drums and bugle corps and all this kind of stuff. The shiny helmets, who were those people? Remember, we used to have the Civil Defense Corps. That's who these people are. And they were all over the nation. They were trained to help citizens. And we had civil defense supplies and that all over the nation. We don't have that anymore, do we? We should. There was a civil defense hospital in the basement of our intermediate school up here for years. So if something happened here, we had the supplies in town. But anyway, they're coming across the bridge. 1946, the bridge is paid for. And so the contract with the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin was they could charge tolls and they could make their money back plus a certain percentage of profit. And after that, the bridge was given back to the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota. So in 1946, the people in town are celebrating. They don't have to pay a toll anymore. And you got to have your beauty queens and your convertibles. Boy, I wish I had that car. And I'll point this out. This is an absolute mistake by me. And there's a few of them in here, and I'll point them out. These came off of negatives that had never been seen in the public since they were taken. Taken in 1946. They came from the Iona Hammond collection. They were little negatives about like this. Well, when I scanned them, there's not a front and a back. And so they're inverted. So actually, this picture should be flip-flopped 180 degrees. But how many people are going to know that but me? If I would have shut up, nobody would have said a word. So, but I just want you to know some of the things that we have to deal with. Hey, it's the same day, and we're going to have a public event. We're going to have this celebration in town. So they got all the fire departments and have a squirt gun war. Now, this is on Elm Street. This is on Elm Street, down here about 6, 8, 10 blocks, right in front of what is now our middle school. The middle school, there's nothing here. This was the skating rink. This is the Hollister House. This is the UCC Church. There were no school buildings here. And the park sits right here. So the town has changed dramatically. Now we have gymnasiums and schools and all types of things there. And there's kind of the finished one. Up in here, this is the gear house. And when we were young, we would sneak out here and we saw a boat coming and we'd sneak out and we'd crawl underneath here and crawl out and we'd ride up underneath the superstructure. And of course, were we supposed to? No. Well, eventually, the bridge operator realized that trying to keep us off there was a fool's errand. So what he did is he just invited us up there. So we got to ride up in the house. And that was pretty cool. Mr. Murphy, Mr. Hoopert, Mr. Church, these guys let us actually come up and ride up in the top, and we got to run the levers and this kind of stuff. That was pretty cool. There's a story, the wheels. I jumped off here, I jumped off here, but there were a few people in town who jumped off up here. I didn't. But there was also a gentleman named Boone Hermanson, we talked about him earlier, and a man named Mr. Clint Most. And when they were 12 or 13, they're crawling around up on the top up there, fiddling around where they aren't supposed to be, and there's a gentleman in town named Charlie Staff. Charlie Staff was a fisherman, but he also was the richest man in town. He owned the Prescott Spinner Company, which in 1920-something made 500,000 lures in 1 year by hand, right in downtown Prescott. But all Charlie wanted to do was go fishing. So he had a brand new rowboat delivered from Shell Lake, Wisconsin, built by the Peterson brothers, who were famous. And he's right down here fishing. And these two little knotheads are up here, and where these cables are, you have to grease them, and there's great big balls of black grease. So Clint Most gets over there like this, and he's got this big ball of black grease. Charlie's down there, and he's like, he dropped it right between Charlie's feet and the bottom of his brand new boat. Well, I have been told that Charlie was a world-class cusser and he outdid himself that day. But he couldn't get up there, and those guys didn't dare come down until he rode to shore and left. Clint Most was also a bombardier in World War II, so he practiced on Charlie's boat before he went into the military. And here's what the bridge looks like. Here's a sheer fence extended all the way through. Here's the Steamboat Inn in its old iteration. This also was an interesting thing. The sheer fence was kind of a rite of passage for the kids in Prescott. When you were a little kid, you'd sit over here and you would try and throw a rock far enough to get it out there. And so we'd stand over here and throw rocks until you could get it there. And as you got older, you could get it farther, and pretty soon you could throw it over it. And that was pretty neat. Then we would swim out there. From here, we'd swim across and go out here. And it was kind of interesting because on the bottom of each one of these piers, I think they were thinking about us young yahoos, because just down below the surface, there is a ledge about this wide. So if we'd get out there, we knew we could rest. It was just a tiered pier, but for me at that time, I thought, hey, they made this just for us. Well, also the fishing in here was great. I'd get off work and come with a bobber and a hook and line and not even a pole and just catch them by hand down in the sheer fences. So the sheer fences were a part of town. Some of it's there, most of it's gone. There's a new bridge being constructed with all the toys. Here it is going in. It's a bascule type. It opens like this now. It doesn't have the lift bridge. Stillwater lift bridge is still up there, still functions, but the big beautiful one will take the traffic now. They're going to work on our bridge next fall for about a month. They got to do some retrofit, and somebody said, wow, geez, it's 25 years old. It's time. That's time. When I was a construction pilot, this is the kind of little flat that I drove. I drive a little popcorn boat like this, and a construction pilot said, you're driving a 195-foot towboat, but my paycheck's bigger than yours. So the size of your boat didn't indicate what you got paid. So that was always an unusual thing. And here it is at open, shooting it from Minnesota with the bascules up. Now we're going to move to a different bridge. Here's our train bridge that we saw. This is the 1905 iteration. This picture is taken from up on top of the car bridge looking down, going downriver. And here's that Hermanson's Island stuff again. This is kind of unique. They're building the new bridge, and the old bridge is still in use. So right side by side, and here they are. And they're getting close. Right over here, this is the center span. The center span of that bridge was not built in Prescott. It was built at the shipyard in St. Paul by Twin City Barge. And then they loaded it on barges, and I happened to be on the boat that we pushed it down here from St. Paul, put it in place, and then we had 4 big cranes out there and we lifted it up and set it in place. But it was actually built in St. Paul. That bridge says, well, it's rusting already. It was made to rust. The rust in that type of steel seals the steel from any further rust. And so it's overbuilt. I mean overbuilt, it's made to carry much more weight than it needed when it was done, because they're anticipating in the future the trains could get longer, the cars could get bigger, who knows. So it is a overbuilt, super strong bridge. We call it the Mickey Mouse Bridge. See, there's Mickey and Minnie. There's the ears, there's the nose, there's the mouth. So the kids in town call it the Mickey Mouse Bridge. Now here we got the bridge. There's our 2 bridges. Now this is the corner of the pilot house. That was 12 feet from the pilot house to the train. 12 feet. So, me to you, and that's how close the train came. Well, there was a little bitty, right on the back of here, you can't quite see it, there's a little porch back there that came out of the back of a restaurant. And Ed Peterson and Dan Fry and I worked there, washing dishes on a Friday night. We're done. We go out back, and near the wells, we're looking around, something to entertain ourselves, washing dishes from 350 pounds of fish. And we each had a little souffle cup of sour cream. And we were waiting for the caboose to come by, because the caboose always had his window open about like this. Well, the caboose got there. We all threw, bang, bang, number 3 hit him right in the nose. Well, we washed those dishes and cleaned up and were out of there like we were the Flash, because we thought for sure they were going to come and arrest us and throw us in jail for assaulting the guy in the caboose. And they never came back, but one of those interesting dumb things. Now-
assuming the statute of limitations.
I figure. And there's what it looks like now. There's what it looks like now. You can see a little more of the Mickey Mouse Bridge. And there's a real nice look at the Mickey Mouse Bridge. Now we're going to move to a different part of town in a different era. This is early 1900s. This is the Jake Seed Company. Jake Seed Company. Harley worked for him for a couple of people. Yes, Miss Jakes. Yes. I thought I should know you. Now I do. How are you doing? But anyway, this is her grandfather. And he started Jake Seed Company. And I remember looking at the award he received. He was a pioneer. He was a visionary. He was a person who saw things. He saw farther into the future than many of the big companies did. So Jake Seed Company was the major employer in the city of Prescott for about 60 or 70 years. Of course, when he started, it was all done on wagons, most done by hand. Old buildings, he just took whatever old buildings he could get to begin with when he first started. And here he is, showing his fancy corn off. And I remember him vaguely. Georgette, what year did he pass? 60s? 1960s?
Yeah, 67, I think.
Okay, I was going to say somewhere around, because I knew him, but nowhere near as well as I knew your father. And now here they are. These are some of the local guys. And most of it was, again, done by hand. Here he is. Harley remembers this, going out on the ears of corn and putting paper bags over every ear of corn in the whole field so they wouldn't get pollinated with the wrong pollen. You talk about a mind-numbing job. How many stalks of corn are in an acre, Harley? But this is I always found interesting. 100 years, in 1848, 10 to 20 bushels per acre. Mr. Jakes' corn, 75 to 90 bushels to an acre. So I mean, that's the advancement that Mr. Jakes was responsible for. He was, if you look back into the history of all this corn stuff, it always comes back to old Bill Jakes. And here he is receiving the Presidential E Award. And I think on the plaque, I remember it used to be on the wall, and it said he was given this award for moving the crop growing area of the United States 500 miles north. He said, on there it said it was like finding another continent to grow food on. And so, interesting little aside to history. Here's what it looked like. Okay, the buildings, some of the buildings are still here. This was the original warehouse. This was here, the storage bins in here, the original offices here. This was not offices at the time, it was a production area and this type of thing. They had some big dryers. This is St. Croix Street. Here. Over here, Mr. Cook lived over here at this time. Mr. Cook, they had a black family, and there were a few black families that lived in Prescott. And my father grew up with them. You'll see them occasionally in the yearbooks. And the people of Prescott didn't think anything of them. They were just part of the neighborhood gang. But Mr. Cook lived over there, and my grandfather was a friend of Mr. Cook. And he would take me, because he lived about 4 blocks from there, and we would walk over to visit Mr. Cook. And he had chickens and all his ducks and all this kind of stuff, and Mr. Cook was a really neat old guy. He had several children that went to our high school. Several of them are buried in our cemetery about 4 blocks out here. Here's another look at the Jake Seed Company. This is all houses now. The entire block is houses. Okay, here's the big meetings. They were not based upon the corporate model. They were based upon the farmer-vendor model. So the Jake Seed salespeople were farmers. Most of them, the vast majority of them were farmers. And they came and they had their summer meeting every summer. And they would get together and talk business and eat and tell lies and this type of thing. And I can remember some huge get-togethers with these types of things. I'm not sure where this one is. I don't think it's up on Mary Mountain, Georgette.
I don't recognize it. It could be. I think it is, actually.
Okay.
Because that's down below.
Okay.
As in the field, those all used to be trials.
Okay. Now here, look what they've done. This is the cornfield back here, but the picture was done so well that the people kind of blend in. Here's Bill right in the front. My mother and father, my mother used to cater things, and I can remember catering a couple of the meals for like 1,000, Georgette, does that sound right? Over 1,000 salesmen would come to town, and they would go up on top of Marymount, just north of town, between here and there's a road up there, beautiful. There's actually a U.S. Geological Survey marker up there in the top of the hill.
Well, it's actually the highest point in Pierce County.
And there's a few other of those markers around here, but they were used to survey, and now these are the detasselers. Now they use choppers. You had to go pull every tassel off every stalk of corn. Thousands of acres. And so they would hire kids. These are all the Prescott rats. But as the company got bigger, pretty soon they were hiring kids from Hastings, and they hired them from Ellsworth and River Falls. When I worked for Jake's Seed Company as an employee, when I was 25 or 30, we actually had to go to Cottage Grove and pick them up by the busloads to come and detassel corn all day, every day. People say, well, that's terrible. It really wasn't. To be honest, they had a big party at the end of the year. The kids, it was a bonding thing. And the kids in Prescott had money that they earned. And Prescott was not an affluent town at all in those days. And so for the kids to be able to go out in the summer and have a job and make money was a tremendous thing. And that's pretty much gone. Here's another group. And I don't know when this is, but this kind of stuff we try and put out there and ask people, do you know anyone in here? And occasionally we get information. This was one of the buildings I showed you. In the summer, it got to be where they would even have college kids come, and they would set up dormitories, and the kids would sleep here and stay here for the entire detasseling season. David McHenry, Richard Stout, some of these people still come through town once in a while, and they were basically the straw bosses, or they were the leaders of the youngsters. But they would hire college kids to do this, and then they were put up here, and then my mom came and made them breakfast and this kind of stuff every day. And because she was the cook for the schools, but in the summer, when they were detasseling, she would work for Jake's and feed the kids. All right, this is kind of an oddball one. This is a coupon book from L.J. Knobloch Ice Company. Prescott was a famous producer of some of the finest ice in the United States. We shipped ice to both coasts on trains. They would go out in the wintertime and they would cut it all out. Down on Lake Street, they had a warehouse and they would store it in sawdust. The warehouse is gone, the home is still there. But old Babe, as I knew him, he tried to chase me off, and he finally realized that it's easier to put the kids to work for you than trying to keep them away, because he also owned the dump. Well, what kid doesn't love to go to the dump? But anyway, they had ice boxes. Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, they didn't have electric boxes. They would come and bring a chunk of ice, a 40-pound block of ice to you. Well, you'd buy a coupon book. It's just like a modern thing. And then you would hang the coupon outside of your door, which looks like this. There's the coupon, $5 or whatever, August 15th, 1931. And you didn't lock your homes, and you'd go to work. He'd see this out, and he'd stop his horse and buggy, and he'd bring a block of ice in, put it in your ice box, thank you, and away you'd go. And I'll have a picture showing us loading ice on the trains. I mean, boxcar after boxcar after boxcar after boxcar. All right, here's downtown Prescott in way early. This is probably a 1890s picture. The house that I showed you where the ladies were watching the bridge building is right here. Notice that the IOF building is not there, so we know this is prior to 1896. This building is burnt, one of the Great Fires. The Great Fires have things in common. This building is still here. It actually houses the Roadhouse Cafe now. It was a dentist office through 2 or 3 different dentists. My Uncle Doc was a dentist in town. He was a drill 'em and fill 'em guy. And he told the new dentist, who now works up in Hill, he says, well, how do you expect to make any money if you aren't going to drill any teeth? And Dr. Michael says, well, I'm going to clean their teeth and keep them from having cavities. But my Uncle Doc was a dentist, and he had the biggest hands in town. It was like, you had to be a dentist? Jeez. And these buildings are kind of here. The smoke shop, and I'm trying to think of what else is in there now. There's a couple other buildings in here. They're still there. This one's around. Notice the streets, all dirt. They were dirt for a long time. Now this is the other side of the street from where you were looking before. This building right here, this building is the no-name building, the no-name saloon today as we know it. The one next to it, that was the St. Leon Hotel, which was torn down actually, and this next to it was a bar that was associated with the hotel. Was owned by Stingy and Rose Stark for a while, and then when they tore the hotel down, they bought what is now Scab's Place on the corner. So they first owned the Leon Hotel and the bar next door. If you look in here, there's a restaurant, Carlos's drugstore. He had a couple different places. There's a cobbler place down here. A couple little restaurants. If you look way up here, there's the old Catholic church. This is before they built the new one when it was a wooden structure. And this building is still here. This has the 5-star Chinese and the eye candy in it. So that building is still there. Okay, this sits on the corner. This is where Papatronio's and the coffee shop are in. This was, they call it the Mercury Building, but he did not originally build it. He originally moved a business in there, but he did not build it. This building was also, has a great story about the fire. And of course, it started on fire. It was 25 below zero. And all of this was gone. All this was gone. This wall was saved, the back walls were saved, and they rebuilt this part of it and left the 3rd story off. So what you see now is the rebuild from the fire. But 25 below zero. Now think about this. You don't have fancy fire engines. You got no water. The city water is not put in yet. That's not done until 1913. And so everything, and it's 25 below zero. So how'd you do fighting that fire? Not very well. Not very well. Well, 1984, we had another big fire. Same thing, 22 below zero. And that's when the other building, the Dudley building I just showed you, burnt to the ground that day. And I lived across the street downtown, woke up and something wasn't right. And I went out, looked out, and hollered up I says, Deb, I don't know what's up, but something doesn't feel right. And all of a sudden I'm watching over there and looking, and I see a little pop and I see smoke coming out of the window. And the heat had finally gotten warm enough inside that it broke the glass. And once the glass broke, bar the door, Katie, because the fire's going. And the flames are shooting 100 feet out of the top. They had fire departments from 5 different towns. 22 below zero. Well, the hose salesman just came through with these fancy new light hoses. Man, you don't have to drag them old canvas and rubber things around. They weigh too much. I'll sell you these brand new ones. So, of course, all the firemen, they bought all these new hoses. Well, when they were full of water and it was 22 below zero, they all cracked. So here they sat. Main Street was flooded with water. We had 2 feet of ice. Luckily, the River Falls Fire Department still had kept their old hoses and were able to bring them to town. So be careful what they sell you. That's like we bought a sign for the school from Florida. What do you suppose happened when it got up here in 20 below? Don't buy a sign from Florida if you want it to work here. But so the great fires are the big buildings. If you go in School Tube, you'll find the Great Fire. You'll find me yakking about some of that. Building on the corner. This comes from, this was sent to us, and it is the boardwalk. Now the boardwalk with Doug and Bonnie Rohr, they were the ones who, actually it was Cernahouse Chevrolet for years. The shop had a dirt floor. Now you couldn't do that. And the car, all the new cars came out on the same day. Remember that? They used to have an event and they'd give balloons and candy and donuts, and you got to sit in there and smell a new, now they got a new model coming out every other week. Marketing, 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 and we're foolish enough to fall for it. Fire destroyed the 3rd floor. This one I can blow up a little bit. But this is the building I told you was gone. This is the one right here that used to be the mortuary, which is still in place. The J. Bean building, which was the jeweler's place, the building is still there. Beautiful old building. I see it's for sale. I don't know what they're going to do with it. My wife's wedding ring was made in that building, and mine was too. Of course, I didn't get mine for 25 years. When we were married, we couldn't afford the ring. I could afford hers, but not mine. So mine cost like 40 bucks. And 25 years later, I came in there, and a young lady in there, and Jim, who was the jeweler, was suffering the ravages of Agent Orange. And he was a good friend of mine. We'd play golf and this kind of stuff. And Deb and I were walking down the street, and it's open. And it had been closed for a couple years. And I walked in, here's this lady, and I said, I should know you. And she says, I know you. And I said, what? She says, we made your wife's ring. She says, I made your wife's ring. It was one of my first projects. She was one of the students for Jim. And she says, we have your ring in the case. And I said, what? She said, the one that you wanted is still here. And so I took it out of the case, slipped it on, perfect fit. She goes upstairs to Jim, He gave me a discounted price. So my wedding ring, they just kept it for 25 years. I now have it. And Jim has passed on. There's our Dudley building again. Also, when it burned down, this side was a bar, this side was an insurance agency. Papa Tronio's was born and raised right here in this little corner. And behind it was all bar, but they had a little bitty corner, maybe about this, and that's where they made all the pizzas, and then the bar took up the rest of the floor. The second floor, when I was there, was apartments. Mr. Alonzo Hauser, who was an internationally famed artist, bought the building. He made a beautiful apartment on this half of this floor. All wood floors, gorgeous. And when he moved out, I actually got to live in there for a while, but my first time I lived in this building, I lived in the third floor. No heat, no electricity. My water bed, I had to keep it going because it wouldn't freeze in the wintertime. I plugged up all the windows, had paper walls, and I lived up there for one winter. And I have to go downstairs to use the bathroom and this kind of stuff, but I paid $5, so it was a good winter. The upstairs, the ceilings were the old tin type and beautiful, and they used it as a dance hall. And that's where they would have the community events. It's surprising how many dance halls were in Prescott. There were roller skating rinks, there were bowling alleys, all of these types of things, which have passed on. Three-story building, Diamond Joe packet line. The packet boats were these steamboats that traveled up and down. Here's our IOF hall. The annual stockholders meeting of the Equity Exchange of Prescott. On the other end, next to where the No Name Saloon, that was the Equity Exchange building when I was a rug rat. That's where the farmers brought their eggs in to be candled and sold, and they would bring all these types of things in, and they would sell cattle feed and this type of thing from the Equity Exchange building. But there's what the IOF looked like from the front door. And they had an opera hall inside of there. They had a 300-seat opera house inside of here also. And this gives you a whole bunch of details on it. Florence Fiedler's house is next to it. One in the background and the fence, that is Dorothea Mitchell's. Dorothea has passed on and is now owned by Mary Beth Schuler and her husband. Doc Jonas and Matt Putzier. Matt left us within the last year, and Doc Jonas has been gone for a while. Here's our building again. They always said it was a great day in the IOF hall when they could move the bathrooms inside, because you can see they were still outside. So it's 22 below, you went to the theater and there you are. And it has changed, very low water here. Here we are again. Up on here you can see a couple things. This is the UCC church in its first iteration. This is the Prescott School up on the top here. Again, low water, and looking at how much of the tide is sticking out, because remember, there were no locks and dams when this picture was taken. And according to old Captain Dick and Roy Beeler, who were both master pilots and good friends of mine, and well, I was born and raised and pestered them my entire life. They said that when they were 10 years old, they could walk across the Mississippi in the summertime and the water wouldn't get to their waist. So people say, well, we need to get rid of those locks and dams. Be careful what you ask for, because the only thing you could float out here would be a canoe or a kayak. And so all those, the billion-dollar pleasure boat industry in the upper Mississippi, it would be gone. So be careful, and the ravagings of the floods we used to have in this area, which were horrific, would be back. So be careful what you ask for, because sometimes you get it and it's not what you want. The dams went in. My grandfather actually worked on the dams. He worked as a CCC. Either CCC or WPA. He was a blacksmith. And so what they did is, above Lock 2 in Hastings, before they built the locks and dams, they had to clear out all the trees. Well, he would get in a pickup truck on Monday morning in Prescott, 4 men, and they would drive in that one pickup. They would go over there, just north of Hastings on the river, and they would stay there all week. They would not come home. And they slept in tents, and then on Friday night they'd come home. And they did that for a little over a year, until they had it all cleared up into Spring Lake and this type of thing. This is a really old picture here. If you will notice, it's hard to see from where you are, but the railroad is up on trestles all the way back up to the hill. because when the high water came up, it just ran over top of this. And look how far Point Douglas sticks down now, and we can't even see it all. Right now, it's about right here. Erosion has whittled it away. This was no lock and dam, so this was all flood territory. This was all flood territory. Now, when they finally put in the locks and dams, they cribbed the railroad tracks. To crib them means that you will take a railroad car full of rocks of a certain size, you drive it out there, Harley gets out, you open the chute at the bottom, and they would dump the rocks right through the rails, and they built it from the bottom up until they got close enough, and that's how what you see now was done by cribbing the old original trestles. And then they had some problems over the years. As the wood would rot, they'd have to keep backfilling it for a while. They've been okay now for a while. Now we have bike paths. Some interesting things in here. This house is here. This is the Mandel House. It is gone now. It was another hotel. Here's another hotel. This was a hotel, but it was the bridge tender for the railroad when I was a kid. The old black house, this was actually a rooming house for workers, train workers and this type of thing. What's interesting is this building right here still has this is where the pilot house is today. These walls are inside the pilot house. Now remember, it's 12 feet from here to the railroad, it's 12 feet from here. So you had that train going right down the middle of town through a passageway about like this. And the corner was much, 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 much sharper than it is now. Now, you live next to the railroad tracks, you saw the smoke. So what'd you put up with every day? Ladies, when'd you hang your laundry out? That was a big issue. I didn't realize, but you read some of the thing, the hanging of laundry was, they would try and talk to the railroads, and the ladies in town says, just give us a few hours on Monday or something when you're not gonna have a train so we can hang our laundry out. Well, I never thought about that, but that would be a real thing. Here's the old building that's burnt down. Most of these are gone. All of this is gone now. These buildings are still here. These buildings, Charles, this picture is taken from about where the St. Joe's parking lot is, the very north end of that parking lot they have there. You were asking about Walnut Street? Here we go. 1890 Prescott. How do you do this kind of thing? So what we do is we get these pictures and you try and place datum and you try and find the time. So what you do is you're looking thinking, geez, I wonder what that is up there. So I click in here and I bring it up. Then it says lumber office. And if I look at this, that's an S and that's a U or an I. Well, guess what? There was a Curtis Lumber in Prescott in the 1880s and 1890s. And so we can locate this, but you kind of got to look back. We do a lot of this looking back in the old photos, trying to figure out where is this? And we've seen enough of them between the people on the Historical Society and that, we can kind of place them. Now remember, no radios, no phonographs. If you had music, you played it. What a horrible time to live in, huh? I think they did better than we did in many cases.
I've got a question. Now, the lumber, where did the logging stop? I mean, was that at Stillwater?
No, oh no, this was where, I've got some pictures of that in a little bit, and we'll go, when we get to the mills, we'll explain that. Because the mills were a big part of the town. There were 8 sawmills at one time. Three or four of them were on Lake Street, which is now nothing but $1 million homes. Okay, this is in front of the N. Swanstrom house. This guy is the tailor. He makes fancy clothes. This is his assistant. And so this building is where, right next to the roadhouse, which was Prescott Electric, and there's another business in there right now. The front is different, but the building is the same. The building is the same. But I get a kick out of this. They all have mustaches, except these guys. And they all wear hats, suit coats. Prescott Hotel, this is one of the 22. This was actually the Beeler Hotel at one time also. Mary Beeler has written the history book. If you're not from town and you do not have a copy of the Prescott history book, might I have you buy one? Because there are less than 80 of them left on the planet for sale out of the original 1,000. And it is also a historical book, and that it has won award after award as being one of the finest historical books in the nation. And so a good portion of what I'm telling you comes directly from that book. And if I don't get it right, Mary will holler at me because I see her every week. This is a home in front of it. This is that UCC church up on the hill. This would have been up Orange Street. Orange Street would have been right out here. And this is right up behind downtown. because they still had farms right in downtown. Okay, now we're coming up from the railroad tracks. Okay, here's that St. Leon Hotel I mentioned. This is the one that Stingy and Rose owned. This is the No Name building. Okay, this building is still here. There are 2 or 3 of them left. The limestone walls that have been opened up by the fires are some beauty. You get them in the morning and the beautiful sunlight on them. The limestone is gorgeous. And people don't look at that kind of stuff because you miss things. But so this is looking up from a different area. There's the building where Papachonio's was, and see, it's only 2 stories now, so this was after the fire. I don't see any cars. Oh yeah, there's one. So it's at least after the advent of the cars. The No Name used to be the Joe Ferner store. It was a variety store, a dry goods store. The Ferner family owned 2 or 3 different businesses in downtown over the years. Here, guess what? Putting in the water in downtown Prescott. And right here, from here out, down underneath, it was concrete. And the reason was, and here they're gone, the hitching rails for the horses were there. And if they didn't put concrete, the horses would dig into the street and you'd end up with a big mud hole there. So they, out from the curb 4 or 5 feet, they put a 4 to 5 foot concrete bed just for the horses to stand on when they were at the hitching rail. Well, Prescott's getting beyond the horses now. And look at, here's looking out at 35. Some of you may have driven up this road. Ain't here anymore. There's the St. Leon Hotel. There's the Home Bakery and Restaurant. This guy was a cobbler, shoemaker. He sold his business to Cap Garber. Cap was only had 1 leg, and he was the man who used to fix my shoes. And his wife worked in a restaurant with me, Blanche. And we'd go in and listen to stories. Actually, when Cap quit doing it, Carl Peterson went and sold radios in there in the 1950s and 60s. This is one of the famous pictures of Prescott, which is, if you look, here's our IOF building. Water's really low because you can see way out into the St. Croix. The bridges are up. But look at, here's the steamboat business, and look how many houses are left down here. Very few. Well, this was so sharp that the trains had to slow down anywhere from like 10 to 15 miles an hour or less. They would creep around there. Well, in the 30s and 40s, hobos were familiar. I have at least 2 or 3 relatives who were hobos because they lost everything, and they traveled the rails and tried to find a job and ended up finding one. But here, they knew the trains would slow down, and here's where they jumped off and got on. And my father always used to say, leave those guys alone, they're just guys having a hard time. And a little farther down underneath is the Hobo Hotel. The Hobo Hotel is a passageway underneath the railroad. And it's about 12 feet wide and about 8 feet high. They had pots and pans in there, and whoever used them would clean them, and they would put them back in there. And they had a couple blankets in there, and they'd find some wood, and so the hobos would come in there and stay and fix it up, put it away, and now the Hobo Hotel is still there. I'm going to take a walk through it next spring because that Hobo Hotel could be a key to getting a bike trail to here. Because getting across the railroad track is an issue. And if the hotel's there and it's big enough, we could use that without having to spend millions of dollars. Downtown is still dirt. You can see it. Well, it's not there. The St. Croix Theater is not here. So I know this is prior to 1937 when the St. Croix Theater opened. So there's Florence Fiedler's house. There's a gap in here right now until the theater was built, put up in 1937, and actually the theater was incorporated inside of the Steamboat Inn. The top part and the part towards the river was part of the old theater. That's why it had that weird setup and the floor wasn't level and had different levels. That's because you came in and you would walk down into the theater. And that's why the Steamboat had that weird floor plan in it, because it was the old theater. And I got an email from a Miss Quinn, or not Quinn, she was Quinn. Her father was the one who built it in 1937, so I got an email from her about a year ago. And she just wanted to know what it's doing and this kind of stuff. They'd been through town. A couple things up in here. A good portion of this is all gone down. Here's where the price right sits. Okay, this Rose Stark, Rose and Stingy owned this little house right behind what would be Moe's Pharmacy. And that's where she lived, because when I was a kid, I would go mow her lawn and clean her windows and this kind of stuff. Wonderful lady. Wonderful lady. Sheer fences there, but this is, again, all in the history book. Downtown Prescott, building still exists. This is where the smoke shop is downtown. In this day, it was Simpson's drugstore. Here's Oscar and his wife. These two gentlemen, one has just passed within 2 years. This is Marcel Marsh Tobias, who owned the Ford dealership and the Pure Oil station. This, the old goat, I just saw him a couple hours ago. That's Huck Eaton. That is Harley, and they are in visiting. And this is Hazel Schmidt. We used to call her Tweedle. And Tweedle and Timmy were the two ladies who worked there. They were my buddies because I was a comic book addict. And every time the Gopher News people would come to town, they would take one comic book of all of my like, put them in a bag, and save them for me so that when I would come in, Tweedle or Timmy would walk up and hand me my bag of comic books. And if I had them all now, I'd be a rich man. I went to college and my mom threw them all out. And I says, Mom, you just threw away $1 million. Oh well. But so I can well remember Simpson's drugstore. The malt machines back here and all this kind of stuff. I can remember having the seats and this kind of stuff, Mary, when you go in there. It was wonderful. Souvenir, this is St. Mary's Church. About halfway between here and Ellsworth, about 6 miles out of town. 1872 to 1922. This is their 50-year anniversary in Big River, Wisconsin. Tourist Park, here's where we are. But this is 1916. And this is the original building. Look at the cars.
And is that about the location that this...
It's the exact location. It's the exact location as we are now. Boy, they did a lot of work, didn't they? Dirt between it and all this kind of stuff. Here's a little different look at the building. This building was here when I was really little, but it burned down. And then they built the next iteration, which was half walls and a roof, and with 2 beautiful fireplaces. And my family would come out every 4th of July and have our picnics out here when that pavilion was here. My son was born on July 1st. My father was born on July 5th. So the Eggers family always came here and celebrated the birthdays for those 2 gentlemen. My dad passed on in February, and my son's still running around here somewhere. So here we are now. By the way, I am a drone pilot. I have one, and I've took many, many hours of terrible video. So I've also gotten much better at it. And here we are from up in the air, looking down where we are right now. There were trails up and down here. The kids used to be so much fun to run down them because they were all sand, and if you wiped out, you just roll all the way to the bottom. There was a swale here you could go down. There's one over here. Over here is Linda Erickson's home. You can't quite see it. And there's a little ravine down in here, and I remember Jim Dodge. You know, we're dumb kids. We're down in there playing in the woods, and he's got an old drop knife, which is kind of like a switchblade from World War II. Big one about like this, and you drop it like this, the blade pops out, and he's down there chopping on something, boom, into his thumb he goes, bleeding like a pig. And so Dr. Hanna owned the cottage up on top. So we ran up the hill, and that's how we met Dr. Hanna when he patched Jim up. And after that, Dr. Hanna was one of our buddies. But he lived in the cities, and he would spend a good portion of the summer here. But Jim just about cut his finger off. This is Lorraine Eichmann. She again was the mother of Doug, who I graduated with, ended up being one of my best friends. She was a hoot. Lorraine's Lonely Hearts Club is famous for dressing up all these women. I don't know who this is. I haven't had a chance to chase all these down yet. But she had a costume shop. She had more good ideas on a bad day than most of us have in our whole life. Wonderful woman. And actually, if you go on YouTube or SchoolTube, she has a documentary that is tremendous, done by her granddaughter. And here she is. There's her granddaughter who did the video, actually. There's Lorraine. This is Pauline Barnes. This is Dorothy Most, who passed away, what, 3 years ago now. But a while ago, another wonderful lady in town. She sang at my wedding. This one, again, I've got to pester people and find out who all these people are. I believe that this is Paula Rice, who owned the No Name before it was sold. But Lorraine would get all these ladies out there, and my brothers or my sisters, so they'd put all these costumes on and they'd go to the parades, and they had more fun than anybody else. And Lorraine never drank. Now, this is an interesting postcard to think, why in the hell do you got a postcard here? This is written by Father Thelonious Casey, who I believe Charles has just finished being sainted by the Catholic Church. He was born within 5 miles of here in Oak Grove. And it's kind of funny, he says, starting my vacation, also students from St. Thomas offered Holy Mass today for my converts. Four more converts yesterday, 28 in total. Deo grata, thank God. Many are Norwegians and not strong in their faith, and I can talk them into being a Catholic. So this is, yeah, you know, so this is 1921. Well, that's, hey. But so it's really interesting to get these old postcards, because now what do? We pick up our dumb, well, it's a dumb phone, it's not really a smartphone. It does dumb things and you think it's smart.
I'm surprised you wrote that on a postcard.
I am too, when I first saw it.
Maybe the postman was Catholic.
But anyway, this is one of the drone videos of the beautiful stuff. These are new little bitty parks in town, baseball fields. Katie Laney, the medical slave, sits in the Historical Society. When Doc Laney came to town, remember the streets were dirt. The city did not own a snowplow. So in the wintertime, good luck. My father actually built the first snowplow out of an old farmer, and he put a hydraulic bucker on the front end, and that was the first snowplow because he was the city street superintendent for about 6 years. And my dad was an old farm boy. Those old farm boys could make anything out of anything. I mean, well, so can Harley. But I mean, and so if Doc knew that a storm was coming, he would bring the horse in from out in the country and keep it in his garage. So that if, let's say, somebody's having a baby, they had phones, they'd call up Doc, he'd hop in a sleigh and he would come and help. And so that's Doc Laney's medical sleigh, and this is his wife in there. And this sleigh is in the History Center right now. There's my mother in high school band. Donna Taplin, Donna Eggers. Kind of strange because there were 12 kids in her family. Her family lived in Ellsworth, but she graduated from Prescott. Why? It was quite common then, because the homes weren't as big as they are now, and it was quite common if you had too many kids, you'd farm a couple of them out and rent a room for them someplace. It was cheaper than renting a bigger house. So my mother graduated from Prescott, along with 2 of her siblings, but they originally are from Ellsworth. The other 9 kids all graduated from Ellsworth, but she graduated in Prescott. And there she is, her high school graduation picture, and she died, what, 23 years ago. This is their wedding day. Now, the reason I put this in here, this is more of what we do as a history people, is that a lot of these people in here we know. This is Dorothy Rice. This is Dorothy Algren. That's Jean Hermanson. That's Laverne Tobias. There's my Aunt Phyllis. There's Ruth. This is Betty and Bud House. There's Lorraine and Porky Eichmann in the background. This is Loppy Wolf and his wife. There is Dorothy Most. My Uncle Danny is hiding here just coming up the stairs. Marion Beeler. So what we did at my father's funeral is we handed this picture out to people. And they loved it because they came and identified some of these people. So this was taken when my parents were married in 1950. And this is the UCC church in town looking down from the stairs. Oops. There's Grandpa Bill and my grandmother. This is me in a clown suit, and this is before my parents could afford to build a garage, because remember in those days you didn't go buy a building. In my neighborhood you built a basement, you capped it off, and you lived in that baby while you were building the top floor. And then in my neighborhood there are 6 homes that were done, and that way you never had a mortgage. And I remember on Saturdays when my uncles would come like a herd of flies, because I had, you know, with 12 kids in one family and all the rest of it, there'd be 8 or 10 of these guys every Saturday working on Dad's house. And so it was built by my uncles. My Uncle Bill, born in 1893, I think, 1894. William Eggers Sr., this is Lillian. Strange. She was unusual. She played college basketball in 1912 in Nebraska. Now you think about it, women playing sports in the early 1900s, you were a heretic. You can't be doing that. Women are supposed to just have babies and sit home and work, right? Well, she played college basketball. There's me in my clown suit. This is my sister Deb, who's about 3 years younger than I am. And
Halloween, or did you always wear a clown?
Well, this was pretty much. This is my dad's 1952 Chevy. It had a starter button in it. So as a little kid, I'd get in and push the button and it would move. I thought that was cool, except I would drive it off the edge here. And then I thought Dad would be mad at me because I wrecked the car. Well, I didn't. And back here, if you look up on the hills, this is where all homes now, every bit of it filled in. And so I guess I'm to the point now in this where the Eggers family has just become history. And so this is what we collect. We've been fortunate enough to get something from the Simon family recently, from the Knobloch family recently, the Hammond family, the Eggers family. This is how we keep our history alive. Oh, there's an old tin type here. Here's Prescott. This is when they just were building the bridge. This is the first iteration. Remember I said it was all up on a trestle? There it is. If you look up on the skyline, all I see right here is the UCC church. That would make sense because this bridge was finished in 1886. The fancy school building didn't go up until 1887. We would see another spire over here somewhere. I thought this, when I first looked at it, I thought, a graveyard? It's not a graveyard, it's just stumps. Here, this gentleman is at the train depot in downtown Prescott. When I was a kid in 1965, Dayton's opened in downtown St. Paul. Cool. We could take a train to St. Paul, $1.25 round trip, left at 5:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the morning. Came home at 3:30, 4:30, and 5:30. And you could go round trip. So you can imagine that my parents would allow me and my friends to go to St. Paul on the train and run around all day. We didn't get in trouble and nobody mugged us and killed us. We're not as evil a country as people make us out to be. Most people are very nice. And I can remember going in Dayton when it was brand new, being 12 years, 13 years old. My buddies going in there with Jim Dodge and Jim Tobias, and we thought that was pretty cool. And in the morning, the people would just walk over the hill with their cup of coffee and newspaper and get on the train. There was only 2 stops between here and St. Paul, so it was almost. But now, we can sit in our car for hours. Now, here's our train coming through again, but what do you see? There's a train coming across the bridge, and there's our smoke plume that I mentioned. I mentioned the sawmills. There's our first vision of a sawmill, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. Look at over here. Point Douglas has all these buildings, and now you'd be hard-pressed to see more than 1 or 2. They're all gone.
Is that all private property up in there now?
Yes. Most of it's private property, but they have no trespassing signs, but I know the people want it, and they said, we just put them up to make the lawyers happy. And he says, if you come up here, I don't care. You know, I've talked to the Denmark people over there, they said, go walk through there. All you can do is learn history. And yeah, it's all private now. The train in Prescott, Wisconsin, steam train, here we are. This is just down below us here, a couple blocks. 1886, we got a train depot. Just being finished. Notice they're still up working on the water tower. A few buildings down here on the riverfront. Okay, here you're looking from the second water tower looking down. So you can see Main Street. Well, I don't see any cars, so this has to be probably around 1900. And notice there was a way to get up here. You could get up to Main Street here. That's been closed for decades and decades. This was the mail post. Okay, this was water. The mail post, Prescott was the transfer point for most of the mail in this area. So what they would do, they'd bring it into the mail. The post office would put it in these big giant canvas bags, probably about this wide and about this high, and tough, really tough stuff. They would hang it here on this thing, sitting like this. The guy would go by with a hook on the caboose, and he would hook that bag of mail and drag it in, and we'd go to St. Paul. And that's how the mail was moved out of Prescott, was on a hook on the train. And I can remember as a kid, they still did that until they closed our depot. Well, in the 50s, I watched, my dad took me down and says, watch this. And that was pretty cool. And also notice most of the businesses have awnings in front of them and that type of thing. But most of this is gone. These buildings are all gone. They're where the condominiums are now. Load and ice. Here we are. That's a wagon full of ice brought up from Lake Street, and they're loading it on box cars and shipping them out of Prescott. And he's got his big ice tongs, and he's dragging it up the inclined plane. And if you look at it, he's got like oil skins on because it's probably wet, probably a soaking wet job. They also loaded, we raised sugar beets here in the early 1900s. We raised turnips, all different types. Here's what it used to look like when I mentioned the other way down. This is all gone. A gentleman named Vince Shealy has built a garage down there now, which he has tried to make it as close to the original depot as he could and still use it for what he needs. I have to thank him. He even went and found the right font for the sign and this type of thing. So if you go down there, you can kind of see this picture in that building. And he did that intentionally because Vince has been coming here, well, he's older than I am, and he's been coming here in the summer every year for 60 years plus. Okay, here we are. Now we got our grain depots and everything in. This was grain storage back in here, taking care of business. This is an interesting picture. I'll see if I can get a little closer. I don't think you can quite see it. So, if you will notice here, the window's broke, and that window's broke, and this window's broke. Well, the train depot guy was there, and they came down and wanted to rob the depot. The depot master, they chased him out. He dropped the key to the depot on the ground and stood on it. The robbers weren't smart enough to figure out he was standing on the key, so they went back and broke into the building, couldn't get into the safe, and so they used black powder and dynamite and blew the safe all to heck, and that's why all the windows are blown out. That was after a robbery. Look at the ladies in their long dresses and this type of thing.
What year? What year?
Oh, geez, late
Decade?
huh?
What decade?
About 1890s. About 1890s. I'll have to look it up because the date is in there. But I always thought this is one of the great stories as I'm reading this. You had a robbery? Oh yeah. Now this is across in Minnesota, where the train derailed. Well, and you see they have timbers here holding this car from falling into the Mississippi, which is kind of nice. The train was full of apples. The people from Prescott flocked over there and filled up bag after bag after bag of apples. And so, better than going to Carpenter's Apple Center, I guess. All right, here we are with our train some more. This is the Zephyr. I remember when I was a kid, it used to be really cool when the Zephyr came to town. But this is Pine Coulee, south of here, about a mile and a half. And this is about the third or fourth iteration of the bridges, but they had a big flood, wiped it out, they got half of it fixed, and this guy's inching across there, hoping that the whole thing doesn't fall down. And the land is owned by the Christensen family, I yet believe to this day, and this is where we played all the time as kids. It is, I've been nagging at the Christensen family to donate that for a county park for about 40 years. Maybe I'll win, maybe I won't. But it's just a unique geological feature that's, it's actually painted on the cupola of the Pierce County Courthouse. Here we are, now we've moved up to the train depot. Notice there's no crossing here anymore. This is about 1970s because I'm looking at Craig Johnson's car. He's a year younger than I am. This was the Johnson Brothers Mill they used for storage and that type of thing. The farmers came, dumped the trucks in here, then they loaded the rail cars back here on this spur. A gentleman named Ray Wetterland was the train depot manager at that time. And see how close it came to the pilot house. And there's Prescott. And here's another one. Now we're a little older again. Okay, here we are. Stopping train car. When I look at this, there are vehicles up here. And when I look at the style of her dress, I want to say this is 1920s. I want to say this is about 1920s because we looked at the car, looked at this, and we looked at everything around, and we kind of pinned this into the 1920s. But again, inside this building is the pilot house. Okay, here's the road crew working on this. This gentleman was from Prescott, Mr. Reichert, and this gentleman was Mr. Simon. They're both from Prescott, working on just putting new rails in. This is what it looked like a long time ago. This was probably a tintype picture from the 1870s, maybe one of the earliest ever taken of Prescott. Notice up in here, no train, no railroads of any kind. Okay, you mentioned logs. This guy has a raft of logs. And now, I wonder if I can remember my numbers. In 1866, in the St. Croix River Valley, there were 124 logging camps. In 1866, they cut down nearly 2 million board feet of white pine and shipped it out. And they did that year after year, because when the Europeans first got here, this didn't look like this. It was tall forests. Except the land that the Indians themselves used to grow their own crops on, it was white pines. And we took care of them, didn't we? Ain't many left. But anyway, they had so many logs, they would do most of their logging in the wintertime, when the ground was not frozen, much easier to move them around, and they would pile them up, like here, on a hillside. And then when the water came up in the spring, they would go knock the logs out underneath, they would roll down the hill into the river, and they would float down to Prescott. Each log had a brand on it from whoever cut it down. And so they said that at peak years, they put a boom across the mouth of the St. Croix River, and the logs would fill the St. Croix from here nearly to the Kinnickinnick River, which is 6.5 miles. Bank to bank, shore to shore, 6.5 miles of logs. Now, many of the logs were herded up in bunches like this and taken all the way to St. Louis for processing. But we had 8 sawmills in town. So what they would do is, these guys would go out, herd the logs up, bring them to the mills, and then Georgette's Mill would just cut them up, and then you just keep a tally sheet of whose logs you brought up that day. And you could literally walk across the river on the logs. Old Babe Knobloch, he used to fish for the logs in the bottom of the St. Croix, and as a rugrat, I'm like, "What are you doing, Mr. Knobloch?" He says, "I'm looking for wood." He'd be out there in a pontoon boat, fiddling around, and we're down the beach, and you'd watch him out there. We said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm looking for logs." I said, "Well, that's in the water." He says, "Some of them were so dense that they sank." And old Babe would be out there with a grapple hook, and when he'd get one, he'd hook it good, and he'd go back to his house right down by the beach, and he'd bring his cable out there, and he'd hook that on, and he'd drag those logs out of the bottom of the St. Croix and take them just south of here and saw them up. And they were worth 7 to 10 times what ordinary wood was worth. And so I got to watch him do that. When he told me he's fishing for logs, I'm like, well, he also used to run the dump and lots of other things. He was quite a gentleman, to say the least. Party barge. You're going to town. We're going to have a party tonight. Except 3 party barges came. So, the challenge of the riverboats was to have the best calliope player, because they would move during the day, and they would pull up on the shore of Prescott, and it might be 3 boats show up on the same day. All day long, the 3 calliope players would compete as to who played the best. And at night, people would vote by which barge they got on to go out at night. And so what they would do is they'd get on this party barge, they'd have a band up there, and the boat's pushing it. They'd take them out, and they'd drink and dance and party and listen to music and bring them home. But if your calliope player was no good, you went broke. And this is right down on our riverfront here. Remember I mentioned Hermanson's Island, and I showed you where part of it was? This is what it used to look like. It was an island, and the water did flow through there. And I can remember this when I was a kid, because you could walk out here and catch the crayfish and this type of thing, and walk out on the island. Then when they dredged it, they covered it up with dredge spoil and built it up as you see now, part of the boat harbor down here. But that was Hermanson's Island. People say, well, where's Hermanson's Island? Well, it's right there. It's buried about 20 feet. Okay, here we are. Now, this is the test. Think about this. There's the IOF hall. That's looking down here. If I'm looking, going this way, I should see Prescott here. What happened there? I inverted this. And I didn't do this. This picture was inverted. It should be on the other side. The IOF hall should be here, and you should be looking the other way. This picture was taken from Minnesota. You should be looking up to St. Croix. It makes you look like you're looking down to Mississippi. There we go. Now we're up to putting, actually, I don't know if I have it in here, they've got one where they're fishing the car out of the river after it fell off the ferry. That was a common occurrence. Of course, the SS Eggers also made its occurrence down there. The SS Eggers was my Uncle Bill's garbage truck. He would park it behind the bakery so that, Kenny Benson and us, they could just throw this stuff out there. Unfortunately, the emergency brake didn't work too well. It was parked on this little hill, and it came down the hill and jumped into the St. Croix River. And the first time it was just like a dump truck, so they pulled it out. And So then you got a new one of those fancy garbage trucks with the big cylinders like this. And I well remember this. So they get down there, down in, the SS Eggers goes in again. They go down with divers, they hook it up with these big cables and these great big tow trucks. They get it all the way up. The barrel was full of water and they tried to pull it up before they let the water drain out. So both the cables broke on the tow truck and the SS Eggers went back to the bottom of the channel. They had to get new cables and go and fish it out. This time they waited for the water to drain out before they tried to pull it up. Charles, this one again was taken from the St. Joe's spot. About where their present parking lot is, a little farther up, right where they're going to build the new building is where this was taken. And there's the Mercury Mill again. Okay, here we are with our old bridge and stuff again. Okay, Lake St. Croix. This is where they did. They would paddle out. You see the women going in their dresses. They would get in the boats and go for a row and this type of thing. Here we can see our school, the old school up in there. This is the Dudley Mill. The Dudley Mill was a little farther downriver. It's about where the boat harbor is on the south end of town now. This is the Mercury Mill. That sat right where Mercury Mill Park is. This is what it looked like. If you want to see what that mill looks like now, you drive down Locust Street. When you get down there in 178, that's my house. My house was built from the remains of this mill. When the mill burned down, they scavenged the lumber and the limestone and built my house from it, which was finished in 1919. The last thing that was done here was they kind of had closed down. It was a lumber mill, then it was a combination of lumber and feed mill, and then when the logging was gone, it was nothing but a feed mill. They made gold medal fine flour. And they would distribute it from Prescott and deliver it by wagon and this type of thing. This burned down. The last thing they used it for was to celebrate the end of World War I. So World War I ended. Everything kind of worked here. So they went around town, passed the hat, bought a half a ton of coal, stuck it in the boiler, wired the whistle open and blew the whistle until all the coal was gone to celebrate the end of World War I. That was the last formal thing at Mercury Mill. It burned down shortly after that, and my home was built from the remains. And when I bought my house, it was kind of unusual. I wasn't looking for it, but the lady who lived there wanted the home to go to someone that she knew. And it was Mrs. Leisman, who was a Mercury. And I can remember going by there as a kid, and we always went by her place as a kid because she always invited us up on her porch for Kool-Aid and cookies, and she would smoke an old gold cigarette. And she was the organ player for church, wonderful lady. And when she passed away, I wanted to buy the house, couldn't afford it. Her son made it so I could afford it because he wanted that home to go to somebody who lived here and who knew his mother. So that's now where I live. I'm not going anywhere for a while. This wood, if you can't quite see it here, that Curtis lumber stumping, here it is, delivered in Prescott, 1866. This is the trim in my living room right on top of the fireplace. And I would have missed it, but I was repainting and my daughter was numbering all the pieces so I can get them back. And she says, Dad, look at this. And so 1866, I can verify in my home. I mentioned Pine Coulee before. Here we are. Has to be 1886 or later because there's a railroad. This is the beach. Ladies, your swimsuits are made out of wool. And you get wet and they weigh 40 pounds. And I remember Mrs. Mercury, Mrs. Leisman, her mother made her a satin swimming suit with underwear built into it. She was pretty cool. But they and this building is still here. This is Joanna and Paul Nessie's house. This is where Betty Armstrong's home would be right now. And this is our present beach. Here's where the ice road came down right here. And this is about 1910. Okay, the moose and the little moose, commercial fishing. They would net fish underneath the St. Croix River. They would go up to First Sandy, which is a mile or so up. They would send the little boats out, and they would put out a half a mile of nets and come all the way down the river. The biggest catch that they have record of in a single day is 165,000 pounds of fish. It took them 2 days, 2.5 days to get them all out of the water and transported. That's a lot of carp. That's a lot of carp. And these buildings used to be on the riverfront are all gone now. Commercial fishing here, the riverboat rats and the deckhands, in the wintertime they fished because there was no unemployment, there were no jobs, and so they would fish under the ice with nets, to feed their family and make a few bucks in the wintertime. They would cut a hole in the ice here, measure 100 feet, cut a hole here. They would take a 1-inch, 4-inch thick plank, and they would nail them all together. They'd stick the end here, go under the ice. It would pop up on this end. They'd hook a rope here, and now you have a rope under. You hook your net in, you pull it back out, put it back in the water. Dick Schickling, who I mentioned before, had the last commercial license of anybody in Prescott, and that was in the 1970s. Shortly after that, myself and a bunch of my roughneck friends, river pilots and deckhands and this type of thing, we actually went and used his net several times in the winter and went and fished underneath the St. Croix just as they did in the 1800s by using the boards and the holes and this kind of stuff. And we made enough to pay for beer and gas, and that was about it. Kept us out of trouble, pretty much. Dennis Eaton, Al Cotter, Paul Magnan, some of the people who were out, Webby Severson, Pat Luch. These guys all worked on the river. I mentioned Roy Beeler, that's him right there. But these are all pilots and deckhands in the winter, and this is what you did. Otherwise, you would kind of starved. This is what Prescott looked like. This was taken from the boat landing, and like I said, none of this is left. None of this is left. Okay, this is an interesting thing here. This is the old, Georgette remembers it, the diving board at the swimming pool, at the beach. We used to have a 20 by 20 platform out there, held up on barrels, diving board on one side, tower on the other side. And it was wonderful. It was a rite of passage when you could finally swim out there, when those mean lifeguards would let you swim out to the board. Of course now, in the era of lawyers, what happened to it? You can't have anything like that, somebody might get hurt. And so we no longer have any type of a platform or anything to swim out to anymore, and it's simply because of legalities and lawsuits. We didn't have any, but remember, terrifying things. And they would always bring them down out of the St. Croix and park it here because the ice sheet in the St. Croix would scrape their docks and things off, and in the springtime they would all go down the river. And so many of the people up the St. Croix, I don't know if your dad did too, didn't he? They would bring their docks down and park them between the bridges. There was a little alcove in there, and they would park them between the bridges so they didn't get dragged down the Mississippi in the springtime. 1965. Okay. Here's the middle. They got the bridge raised because they wanted to let the junk through. This side is underwater. The bridge was closed for about a week and a half or 2 weeks or more. And so the people in Prescott walked across the train bridge, and they walked up on the hill, and you parked your car over there, and I picked you up over here. We drove down, walk up, and we take your car to work. Otherwise, you had to drive through Hudson or Red Wing. And so there was 20, 30, 40 cars parked on the other side. And in the morning, I remember my dad heading out in the morning, walking down the hill and going to work during 1965 in the flood. And pretty high water to say the very least, the highest ever here. If you drive down here, I have a habit of doing this on nice sunset nights. I have seen more beautiful sunsets on this river than I care to mention because everyone is different. Everyone is different. So I have probably 50 or 100 personal pictures of towboats and things in the sun. Here we are, the heyday, the Steamboat Inn. We were the nightclub of the Twin Cities in the 60s. This was the place to come. This is where the Vikings came to do their juicing. This is where the Twins came. This is where a couple sports reporters who had a problem with the bottle came. And it was a famous place. I worked down here on the boat dock, and we would park 70 boats on that dock and park them 5 or 6 and 7 wide out into the St. Croix. It was the heyday. This is where they came. And also, the Twins and the Vikings didn't want their guys driving drunk, so they would tell the valet parking guys, if you think they're too drunk, just tell them you can't find their car, buy them a cab and send them home. And so more than once, there was a professional athlete whose car was lost up on the top of the hill in Prescott who had to take a cab ride and back home into the cities. And that was always reimbursed by the clubs. And the owner of the steamboat, Pat Conley, would pay the taxi bill. And so, yeah, that happened. Here's another look at it. This is a river chart. Okay, this is what the pilots see. Okay, Mississippi coming down this way. Here's the St. Croix, Prescott Island. We're sitting about right here. These are where the wing dams are. These are the day marks. A day mark is a flashing light. And in theory, as a pilot, it's not perfect. But if I can see this light, I go straight at it until I can see my next light. Then I slowly swing and I head for that light until I can see the next light. And that's how at night you go up the river. You still use your spotlights, but and the right descending bank is a single blink, left descending bank is a double blink, so you know at least what side of the river you're on. And this came from Popeye Troniers, who was a master pilot, from his personal book. So these are his personal notes on here. We are 811.5 miles above the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. But this is what a river chart looks like, and this is what pilots, I have my own with notes on it and this type of thing, and this is what the pilots look like. So most people have never seen a river chart. Now you think about it. You went and bought a $500,000 boat, and you give them the money, they give you the keys, and away you go. Why don't they give you a river chart so you actually know where to go? You know how many of those $500,000 boats I've seen stuck up in the rocks or out in the mud on the Mississippi? Wouldn't you think they'd include a map? Just because many times we'd be out there and we'd see these people stuck out there. Now we needed 9 feet of water and they're stuck. We can't help them. All we can do is call the Coast Guard or the DNRs or the game warden to come and get them. I always wondered why when you buy a big expensive boat they didn't give you a map. There's the gorgeous St. Croix River. Here we are at the beach again. These are just a repeat of the drone stuff. A couple of these pictures are going to be used on a book on towboats written by a man named Tom Struve, who was a pilot from Prescott, lives in Arizona now. Tom and I graduated together, but Tom spent many more years in the river business than I did. And so he's writing a book on towboats, and I'm doing some editing for him and providing some pictures. Here's that look of the water. And looking down in here, I'd never seen the feathering like this because I'd never been 400 feet up looking down. Here we are, taken from almost the same place, looking upriver. Sunnyside Schoolhouse, east of town. Fallen down. I have tried everything I can to get somebody to help. I've had labor offered. Nobody will bite. Wisconsin Historical Society won't. We just can't do it. So the building is about this far from being done for. The Huber brothers, whose mother actually taught in this building and as Joyce is still alive, they've offered to roof the whole thing if we just buy the supplies. They would do all the work. But I've applied to this old house. I thought it might be a neat project for them. I applied to the Menards Foundation, a couple of the foundations. Nope. So the house, it's basically going to fall down. And I hate to say that, but it's quickly losing it now. There were 11 one-room schoolhouses in Prescott. The buildings, as far as I know, there are 3 buildings left. One is Sunnyside. One would have been Bussy Wayside, which is on the other side of the Valley Tavern, about 6-7 miles. It's a personal home now. And the other one was, not Sand Hill, Corcoran, which is right across from the St. John's Church out here. And that used to be one of the old one-room schoolhouses. And there were 13 of them. My father went to one, went to Bailey, north of town between here and Clifton Hollow. And he always said he was the smartest guy in his class and the dumbest guy in his class because he was the only one. And they used to get their water from this farm, and the kids would walk up and get the farm. It was your job every day. And they opened the thing and there were dead chickens in there, so they quit going to that one and went to the next farm. Different times. This is our 1887 Baroque building, a beautiful piece of architecture. We had 2 wooden buildings starting in 1850, and then we expanded in 1853. And they tore those buildings down and sold them for the grand total of $2,000. The wood went to Ellsworth, and they built some things, and we built this one. And this served us for quite a while. There's a little better look at it. Beautiful building. I think some of these desks are at the History Center. The assembly room in the high school. Now I'm assuming that this is probably after 1920 something, because they put an addition on in the 1920s because it was simply not big enough. It would be the south end of our present middle school was the addition. And the top floor was the assembly room and an office. The bottom was a gymnasium. That's where they played basketball, because they had no gym prior to this building. And if you went and looked inside of that building, you would see there's some weird floors and this kind of stuff that explained because they took the gym, split it into 2 floors, and made 2 layers of classrooms out of it when they remodeled it. None of them look very happy. Here you go, girls. There's what you go to Phi Ed on. You got to go and put your Phi Ed costume on, 1921, 1922. Times have changed. Here you are. You got your other Phi Ed outfit on. I mean, can you imagine going and changing out of all the stuff you had to wear and then you had to change? How much time did you get between classes? 20 minutes? Pretty much all of this is gone. A few of these cement blocks might be there yet, but most of it is gone. This is 1947. Dutheil Pinky, that's my mother on top. This is the Prescott cheerleaders from the high school in 1947. Here's what I mean by the building. This building was built, this part here was where the gym was. They've split it now, and there's windows here, and this is where the library is. This was added after the Baroque Building burned down. So this part was added on in about 1938, I think, when it burned. And notice, there's no gym up here. One building back here, and that's it. The old clock tower is still there. That clock is where? It's in the clock tower downtown. Jerry Vaugier has performed magic to bring that clock back to life. Here the kids are. Can you imagine now this is the teacher. Can you imagine nowadays if you were the teacher to come home and, Mom, we're going out on the lake tomorrow. We're going to go ice skating. Yeah, right. Modern parents, oh, geez, you're all going to die. We could never do that. But this is what they used to do. You got some kids, some have skates, some don't. Some got hockey sticks, and they would go down on the river and skate. It was quite common. And actually, some of the guys would scrape off an ice rink and charge you a nickel to come and skate there. But it was a nickel a week. Okay, here's when we had the Baroque building and this before it burned down. Boy, they look happy too, don't they? I actually have the names of these people. I can't remember all of them, but a couple of them actually I knew. This is 1910. This is the Prescott High School. But look at St. Paul Gas, Platts leaders, and this type of thing. I'm the baseball fanatic, so you got to forgive me. Hey, there's your basketball team. Pretty fancy. Pretty fancy. This is over at the baseball field after it was moved. And this is prior to, this has got to be 1946 or later. 46 or 47 or later, because the field was moved to its present location in 1946 or 47. It used to be about 100 feet difference, so because what you see over here, right over here, this was a pasture for the dairy. And I can remember my father saying before they moved the field, they'd hit foul balls back there and they'd come back full of cow dew. And when the dairy closed down, they were given this land, the city vacated the street, and you were able to put in the form that we have right now. And like right field was the street out there in front of those buildings, Charles. I mean, a home run was easy. This out here was my Uncle Ernie's place, and this, look at all, this is where Flora Square is. Anybody familiar with Prescott? Not a house. This building is still here. This is the roof that was hit by the famous home run, which was either hit by my Uncle Bill or my father. And that we thought it went 500 and some feet, but we didn't realize it was hit before the field location changed. So when we went and, originally it was 536 feet, which is within 9 feet of the theoretical limit of humans being able to hit a baseball, but actually it was about 480 when you move it up to where the old home plate was. So something's happening here. Look at all kids out there and horses walking around and the ball players. Here we got the band again. This is the River Falls Drum and Bugle Corps. There's Uncle Ernie's house. Here's the roof that was hit. And here they come. Now here's the players from town. Many of them this is Joe Bates. Joe Betts, he was the ticket manager. This is Porky Eichmann. That would have been Lorraine. You looked at her a few minutes ago. That would have been her husband. They called him Old Rubber Arm. They said he could pitch 3 or 4 9-inning games a week. This is my father. This is Dick Leesman. That's my Uncle Bill. Right here is Uncle Bill. There's a Floyd Leesman, a Dick Leesman, and a Clarence Leesman in here. This is Herb Steele. He used to be the NSP electric guy, but he was also the manager of the baseball team. And his wife was the telephone operator, where you picked up the phone and Ruth answered it because it didn't even have a dial on it. You just picked it up, went like this, and she picked it up and says, "Who do you want to talk to?" And I'd say, "Oh, I want to talk to Greg." And she knew who Greg was, and she'd plug me in down there. And so she knew everybody in town and everything that was going on. Wonderful lady. But look at, you even got a guy, you got dogs, you got cats, and one guy even brought his fish. So it must be a pet show. And this is an inverted picture. Okay, so here we are. And actually, we blew it up, and you can see this Drum and Bugle Corps, River Falls, Wisconsin. But keep your horses off my baseball field. I wouldn't be happy. I'm the guy who does most of the work, so. Now this is 1949, they were the state champs. Kenny Eichmann has passed on. Where our high school is built, we bought the land from him. Okay, this is Jack O'Donnell. He was the barber downtown for 67 years. This is Clarence Leesman. He was a playing manager. This is Joe Batesel, a ticket. This is Bernie Schumer. This is Frank Brandemule. That is Roger Hermanson, Roger Boone Hermanson. This is my father, Don. This is my Uncle Bill. There's Herb on the other end. This is Michael Cotter, and we just got a letter from Michael talking about being the water boy in 1948 and 1949. Pretty interesting. We're going to add that. This is Jerry Severson, who is still with us. And starting on the other end, this is Orv Thompson. This is Ray Wetterland, Dick Leesman, who I bought the house from and was my neighbor. There's Porky. There's Jerry Reichert, who's still with us. Rex Meyer. And this gentleman, I can't remember all of them, just most of them. But this is where the Borner Farm is, right here. This is my niece's home right here, which was the Lee home. And notice cows. So we still got the cow poop on the ball problem. Here's the same guys. Oh, I forgot. Pudge Korkendorfer, right here, from Hastings, Minnesota. I played with two of his sons later. And in this one, you'll see John McGee, Sr., who passed away years ago, but he is the patriarch of the McGee family in town. There's my dad, 1951. There's my uncle, my grandfather, Bill. And our baseball field, there used to be a grandstand there. Seated 250, had a roof on it, made out of concrete with a steel roof, and we don't have that anymore. So it's always interesting. I guess things kind of travel. My father and grandfather built it in 1951, so I'm in process of trying to build a new one now. All I need, if anybody got $500,000 laying around, let me know. I'll come and see you. There's me. And my dad, they always wondered, they said, well, Prescott was always the Pirates. I said, no, they weren't. The traveling team was the Prescott Cardinals, and every person I've talked to, they were the Cardinals as far back as they can remember. This picture was taken in 1952. I was 3 months old. This is taken on the porch of Doc and Levon's house on the north end of town, which is actually owned by Tom Blank and Linda Bjorkland right now. Here's the baseball field. Notice the complete lack of anything. This is Wilbur Gering's house. Carl and Mary Peterson's house isn't there. Nothing here. This, right here, is where Charles and Mary live right now. And I remember, this was before a couple renovations anyway, right? This building is there. It had to be after 1946 because home plate used to sit right here. Now it's moved down to here. You get up to the top, and you can see here's our middle school. Notice there's no gymnasium. That was put in the 1950s. There's a house hiding behind here. This is where Rich Niebuhr owns the house. I went by here this morning. This is the, trying to think of the last name. I can't remember the last name of him, but that one is still there. But boy, not much there. And did you also notice that the streets, they got grass growing in the middle. They weren't paved. They were not paved. And so we felt that this had to be about 1947, 1948, somewhere like that, because they said it took a while for the grass to grow in and dig all that type of thing out. So my father passed away not quite a year ago, so I've sat down in the last couple years and took him for drives around, and we've seen a bunch of this kind of stuff. There's what it looks like now, from a couple 100 feet up. It's too bad because I can see it here, you may not. Look right here. And if you're close enough, you can see that there was a softball field out there in center field that was done away with. But you can see, and you can only see it when it's, the sun is at a low angle, and you can see where the infield was. It was a scalped infield, put in 1972. I was at the dump. Mr. Knobloch was out there, and he had some fence. I said, what do you do with that fence? He says, oh, nothing, probably scrap it. So I walked away. Other end of town, the NSP guys were putting in new telephone poles. I said, what you do with the old ones? Oh, we'll take them over by ballpark when you got to get rid of them. I said, well, can I have them? And they asked me for what, and I said, well, I'll make a backstop. Okay, so I went and talked to Dad, and I said, Dad, I want to build a softball field, but I need some ag lime or something, and I don't have any money. He said, go talk to this guy, and his last name I can't remember. He was from Ellsworth. So I went out and said, my name is Dallas Eggers, and I said, I'm trying to build a softball field, and I don't have any money. And he said, what do you want? I said, well, my dad said to come and see you. Who's your dad? Don Eggers. He says, well, okay, what do you need? I said, well, I need some ag lime. So he asked me where, and I showed him. So he drives into town, looks, and he says, I can help you. So Don Gutting was the street supervisor at that time. He brought the big loader, scalped it all out, and the gentleman from Ellsworth brought me in 5 loads of ag lime, charged us absolutely zero. Paul Most and Kay Eichmann brought their tractors in from their farms and spread it all out, and we ended up with a softball field in center field. And we used to have lights, and we played our Prescott Days softball tournament there until the lights were taken down. When it was all done, the mayor went by, Marty Gora, and he gets out, and I'm out there fiddling around with something. He says, who built this softball field? I says, I did. He says, well, who'd you ask? I says, nobody. He says, well, he just got in his car and drove away. What could he say? They ended up with a softball field, didn't cost anybody anything. What's he going to complain about? And so 2 days later, Bernie Lepley was the superintendent of schools. He drives down there and he called me. Who built that softball field out there? Well, me and my buddies. He said, who'd you ask? Nobody. He says, well, good, didn't cost the school nothing, thanks. And that was it. And so we played tournaments there for 10 years. But you can still see the footprint of the infield in there. And I'm the one who bounces over it on the mower, so I know exactly where the bumps are. Here's another look at it. 1957, there's Boone Hermanson. This is Bill Most. A few of these guys I should know, but I haven't had a chance to go look through. Here's my Uncle Danny. My Uncle Danny was killed in a car accident just outside of town in about 1956 or 57. Got in a car accident, broke his leg, couldn't move, snowstorm, froze to death. If they would have found him, he would have been fine. My Uncle Wayne was killed in a towboat accident in 1948. Fell off and got squashed between the barge and the boats. His deckhand partner was a gentleman named Salami Hankin. My first deckhand as a pilot was Salami Hankin's son. I mean, so the river rats kind of hang together. My grandmother cooked on the towboats. My mother did once in a while too. So, I would like to tell you I have reached the end of about 170 pictures. Now it's your turn. Questions, comments, witty asides, good jokes, whatever. But
So you connect to that? Did you say that can be connected to?
Yep.
Just go on to
Yep.
YouTube?
Yep. Well, I will take this and we are in process of redoing a bunch of this. We're going to take them and repost them and make a channel on YouTube with all the historical stuff. A lot of these things I will post. And as my friend Mr. M will get done, and what he does is Larry comes out and he records all this process that we run this on local cable television and we post it online and this type of thing. Because some people find it interesting, and I got another show in a couple weeks. I never do the same one twice. There'll be probably a 50% overlap, but we've got so many new ones coming in that no one's ever seen that I keep trying to enter the new ones. But history is amazing. And if you don't know it, you're bound to make the same mistakes as we see day after day in our world. You know. And so thank you for coming today, but remember, there's only about 70 of those books left. Jessica has them for sale right here. So because in about a month or two, we figure after Christmas they will be gone. But thanks for coming to Freedom Park. Nice place to spend a couple hours.